Well, welcome everybody to one of our favorite shows on ICRV Radio. This thing has been going on, oh my goodness, I think we are well into 18 months on air, and it's been a phenomenal journey. Here is your state archaeologist, Sarah Sportman.
Hi everybody. Welcome to our December episode and the final episode of 2020 of the Archaeology of Connecticut. I'm the Connecticut State Archaeologist, Sarah Sportman, and I'm here with my co-host, Scott Brady, President of the Friends of the Office of State Archaeology. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Henry Whitfield House in Guilford, Connecticut, and what will hopefully be the first of a series of shows spotlighting archaeology at our state museum. The Whitfield House is the oldest house in Connecticut, and it was the first state museum established in 1899. So tonight we're going to learn a lot more about the history of the house, the museum, and the archaeology that's been done on the property. To tell us about all of that, we're joined by two guests, Michael McBride, the Curator and Site Administrator of the Henry Whitfield House, and Dr. William Farley, Assistant Professor of Anthropology at Southern Connecticut State University. So before we get started talking about the museum and the archaeology, let's hear a little bit about our guests. Mike, I know you also do a show on ICRV, so some of our listeners may already be familiar with you in the Whitfield House, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the museum?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. From graduating to, as I said earlier, the morning drive time to the evening drive time, and excited to be here. I've been in museum business for 35 years, the last 30 of them at the Henry Whitfield House. And there's still much to be done, and it's a never-ending task, but one of the greatest things about researching and presenting information to the public is our tie-in with archaeology. So I'm excited to talk with you tonight.
Great. We're excited to hear about it. Okay, Bill, Dr. Farley, if our listeners will recall, you were here last spring for a great show we did on plants and archaeology. I think it might have been one of our most popular shows, actually. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with the archaeology at the Henry Whitfield House?
Sure, yeah. It is great to be back. I'm a returning champion from the show. I like to think of myself as the Ken Jennings of Connecticut Archaeology podcast and radio shows. It's also weird, as you heard Sarah stumble over my name. I've known Sarah since I was 19 years old. She taught my field school, so that's how long we've been doing archaeology together, back when I was an undergraduate. So, yes, I'm Bill Farley. I'm a professor at Southern, and I've been there since 2017. And not too long after starting at Southern, I was another professor in the history department. I was looking for a place to do a field school, and a professor in the history department who had a long-standing partnership with the museum put me on to Mike's name, and I reached out to him and said, hey, are you interested in doing a little bit of work together, maybe get some archaeology done? And as you're going to find out in a minute, I had the opportunity to join in a long checkered history of archaeology at the museum. So we've been working there on and off archaeologists for about half a century at this point. So it's exciting to be doing that for the last few years. So we run a field school, an archaeological field school there every summer, although unfortunately we weren't able to this last summer thanks to COVID, but with Southern Connecticut students, undergraduates learning how to do field methods and also exploring some of the cool parts of the property.
Excellent. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the house and the history of the house as a museum?
Sure, yeah. As you mentioned, it's the oldest remaining house in Connecticut. They started construction on it in 1639, they being the group of settlers who were led by Henry Whitfield, Puritan minister. They came over into Quinnipiac, to the New Haven colony in the summer of 1639, negotiated with the Mononkatuk band of Quinnipiac and secured the area that they were going to settle in. One of the most interesting things about the house and the community is that because they're coming at the end of this wave of migration, they've got a lot of information ahead of time, and so they bring stonemasons with them, and they lay out their community very differently than what we're used to seeing in 17th century New England. And so there's no palisade, there's no enclosing fence around the village. The houses are spread out. The acreage around the home lots are much larger. And the stonemasons built 4 of these fairly large defensive structures. The Whitfield house is over 2,000 square feet, so that's huge. It's big by today's standards. And the game plan was that any bad weather, wild animal sightings, or any intrusion by a perceived enemy, the people would leave their little huts and go to one of the stone houses. And as time went by, the other 3 houses disappear in the early 1700s. And for various reasons, some known and some unknown, the Whitfield house continued to stay there. One big reason may be that it was a rental for most of its private life. Then there have been various changes, and then in 1899, the state legislature and the governor made the house the State Historical Museum. And so we've been open since about 1900. Various restorations, evolutions in how things have been presented. We're kind of a guinea pig for the historic preservation movement, the colonial revival movement, and just museum practices. So we have a lot of different storylines going on. We're actually working very hard right now, as we're closed for COVID, to streamline and expand what we think is important. We'll always tell the different stories because the house appeals to people in different ways, but we're going to use our age and our uniqueness to highlight what we think are some really great themes. So that's the 5-cent tour.
Great, thank you. So the museum itself, you said that you've highlighted different themes over the years. Can you kind of expand a little bit on that?
Yes. When we first opened, we literally took the State Historical Museum concept very seriously, and so the building was really a repository, and it wasn't restored, so to speak, to show its historical architecture. They changed out some doors and windows, and then this grand exhibit gallery was created by Norman Isham. For people who are familiar with the historic preservation movement, you'll recognize his name and a couple others that I'll mention in a moment. And so people would come in by horse-drawn carriage or by train or a block from the train station, and they would come in and be greeted by members of the colonial dames of America, and they would get to kind of stand in awe of all the various artifacts from Connecticut's colonial history. So it was a very different interpretation. And then in the 1930s, J. Frederick Kelly was brought in, and he took the building apart down to what was left of the 17th century structure, which basically caused the building to be gutted because so much inside all the woodwork and everything had been changed over the years. And his concept was to go for what we call a house museum, where you walk in and it's supposed to be exactly the way it was. That turned out not to be so successful, only because they then had this massive collection of objects, and if they were going to make believe the Whitfields lived there, they'd have to keep most of those objects in storage because the first settlers had very little. And so it's been ever evolving since then. Also, at the same time was the landscaping. Also in the 30s and 40s, we had a landscape design done by Trix Ferrand. And we're just about out of that design, only because the materials that were planted have been aged out or removed by things like the hurricane of 1938. So we're really at a great point where we're putting in the research and the time, and we're going to be tying in all kinds of social justice themes and really telling the story, bringing in all the voices, particularly at our earliest period, with the Native American kind of coming together with the Europeans. And that's one of the great things about the archaeology, because we don't have much of a written record, or really no written record of the native peoples of this area, and so the archaeology is proving very helpful. So that's another 5 cents.
worth every penny, Mike. Every penny.
It's a penny saved is a penny earned, as Dave will laugh about.
So you said that the house, during most of its time as a private residence, was actually a rental. What kind of rental was it? Was it farming, or was it like ever broken down into multiple apartments or that kind of thing, or was it always just one family?
Yeah, it's a very large building, as I mentioned. So it appears from the limited records, including the census, you would think the census would be very helpful, but certain decades people weren't home or people didn't want to be seen. But it appears as though over time 2 to 3 families were living in the building. So the interior divisions were made, all of which were lost, so we don't have any record of that. And it appears that throughout most of the time, the people living there must have been paying their rent through, farming the property. Mm-hmm. We're still learning more. There's some evidence that when Henry Whitfield and his family left the house after only 11 years, they actually returned to England during what we call the counter-migration, when Cromwell and his Puritan government and church came into power after the Civil War, about 1650-51. Some evidence that some Whitfield relatives may have stayed there, but in any case, whoever was in town, someone must have been an agent for the Whitfields, because they continued ownership of the house. And then it leaves the family after Henry and Dorothy die. Their son Nathaniel sells the house to a family named Thompson in England, and the Thompsons are they own property all over New England, including just outside of Boston, and they're just landlords, and we have no clue if they even ever set foot, here in New England, and it just keeps evolving. We do have a 4-year period just before the Revolutionary War where there is an owner-occupant, but other than that, after the Revolutionary War, it's a rental again, but to the same landlord, the same family, the Griffings, and they own it for 125 years, and they're the ones who are involved in making changes in the 19th century, but then also selling the house to the state. So we have very few owners over the almost 400 years. We only have about 7 owners, and they're mostly from the same families. But the tenants they continue to be a mystery to us. So we're still searching.
Very interesting. It must also complicate any kind of archaeological interpretation to be able.
It does. There's there's no probate record that we can match up to, finds that come out of the ground. We know that because of the rental changes that might have been made, were perhaps not documented. Things were done in the mid-19th century, which is really when we start to know about the house. First view of the house is from the John Warner Barber series, the drawings in the 1830s. The first photographs are from the 1850s. So the first 200 years there's no visual and very little written evidence. The 19th century, we start to learn a lot more, and they're really trying to make the property economically feasible. So one of the homeowners does a massive renovation in the 1868, 1870s, and that probably led to a lot of movement of soil outside, everything from an excavation under the Whitfield house to put in a basement. So that's a lot of cubic soil being moved out, and also regrading areas, putting in, driveways, pathways, leveling areas. So it's your first thought. Every time I was meeting with an archaeologist to begin a collaboration, their first thought is, wow, 1639 plus the pre-contact aspects of archaeology, what could be there, and it's very exciting. And then, we walk the property, we share the information that I just kind of gave to everyone now, and they're like, yeah, who threw a hand grenade into this mix? So not that other places, not other historical sites do not have the same type of issues with disturbance, disrupted soil, horizons that are out of water, etc. So,
see, Mike, this is why you needed a trained historical archaeologist, because this is standard fare for us. I've worked on much worse disturbed sites than this one. This thing's pristine compared to a couple of sites in the Boston area I've had the chance to work on. So we're good. We're good. Yeah, we're
all right. Well, we haven't built on top of anything, and I know Sarah can attest from her experience that all you need to do is look at the roads in New England, and you know that everything underneath is going to be a mess.
Yeah, but you never know what little pockets survive from the past. I mean, I think the last few years has taught us anything. It's that there really is a lot more preserved than people ever imagined possible, given all the development. You just never know what you're going to find, what escapes the ravages of development.
Yeah, it's and one of the aspects of our latest collaboration with Bill and Southern, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, is the fact that because we go back so far as a museum, and that our archaeological program goes back so far, not only are the historical museum techniques and practices evolving, so is archaeology and the technology that we have now. And some of the work, hopefully all of the work, can be fed now into a database, we're hoping, and software programs can manipulate it, whereas trying to do that, as a human being, it would be your life's work. And so that's just one aspect, and I only know the slightest bit about that. So that's I'm always excited, every time we do archaeology, because I know it's an ever expanding, and the possibilities are growing. So.
It's very true. But the Whitfield House is such an interesting site because, like a lot of historical sites with as deep a history as the Whitfield House, and really 400 years of continual occupation, and then not even getting into the likely pre-European native sites that are there too underneath. This site has an incredible artifact density, and especially as you get close to the house, where we were working, say, in the 2019 field season and some of the previous excavations. I mean, we were finding tens of thousands of artifacts potentially per square meter, and your audience will, who are pretty well educated in this archaeology thing, will know that is a rather large number of artifacts. So what Mike says, that just trying to get all this stuff into a database so that we can even look at it at a quantitative level is going to be a huge multi-year project, and then trying to link that up with some of the prior data from previous excavations. But once done, we're going to have just an incredibly robust data set to look at with this site. So that's one of my long-term, really, really exciting opportunities. But it's going to take some patience, because it will be likely a number of years before we're really at that point where we can look at the site as a whole, rather than in little piecemeal ways, which is sort of the way we can talk about it now.
So, Bill and Mike, can you kind of tell us a little bit about some of the archaeology that was done over the last 50 years before you got there and started, and some of the things that they found, maybe just kind of the highlights? I mean, has anybody found any evidence of the earliest English occupation there, or has that so far been kind of lost in the shuffle? And, what else have they found?
Yeah, there have been artifacts that clearly date to the settlement period. They're few and far between, and again, once we crunch numbers and match up, where they were found, that alone is going to help us with, what the ground levels were at various times in history, and will help us determine how much disturbance there's been. And we have found a fair number of native items. One of the things about the Whitfield House's location is, like many of the coastal communities, and I know Dave has had people talking about coastal change and rising of the seas and such on various programs. But we're on the very first rise of ground up from Guilford Harbor, so we're 26 feet above sea level. And that doesn't sound like a lot to most people who live inland, but 26 feet, we will be the island in 50 or 60 years when the sea rises. In fact, we just met with somebody who was in the neighborhood doing analysis for DEP, and there's some areas along the edge of our eastern property that we should probably schedule for excavations soon, because they will be underwater in 40 or 50 years, according to the projections.
Boy, that's a fascinating point, Michael. That really, the fact that you have to take these things into consideration in terms of getting what you can get out of these grounds before it's too late.
Yeah, that's a tale as old as time in archaeology. So archaeologists have for decades thought about erosion. Like a place like Cape Cod, which is sort of eroding away over the course of the decades, and archaeologists have been trying to capture really important archaeological sites before they're just literally obliterated by the sea and the wind. And so with global warming and rising sea levels, it's a whole new challenge in that regard. So certainly this is a global consideration in archaeology, and certainly is for us locally too.
And not that it wouldn't be exciting in 50 years for whoever comes after me to do some underwater archaeology, but we try to avoid that if we can. And there's plenty of great underwater archaeology in Connecticut that I'm sure Sarah, has talked about or will talk about on future shows.
That'd be a cool future show. Yeah,
so in any event,
archaeology.
Yeah, circling around though, for any culture, topography is very important, and they have an understanding of how it helps them in everything from daily life to defensive purposes to, the weather, protection from the weather. And so 26 feet above sea level is good. And it's very clear that the Minunkatunks and their predecessors were utilizing this property and must have understood the importance of its height. So there have been some pockets of native. There was a couple shell middens, one questionable shell midden. We found through some of our work quartz flakes and I'm going to pronounce this wrong because, I'm not the archaeologist, but of a point. And so the natives are there. They're there. But it's great to have this current relationship with Bill because he is a New England guy. He's our previous work that has been done has been kind of hit or miss. I should say that Bill has packaged it into kind of the last half century, but there was, I wouldn't call it archaeology, but during the 1930s when J. Frederick Kelly was working, he dug around the outside of the building just kind of exploring. Didn't save anything, didn't really make too many notations, obliterated a lot in terms of archaeology goes. And so the foundation area, the builder's trench, as we sometimes call it, is extremely disturbed. Some of the Native American material we found was literally centimeters from the top and had many later period artifacts underneath it. So that's a good example of that problem. Then in the early 1960s, one of our curators at the time really wanted to be an archaeologist. So he did a little bit of testing in the 60s, and his technique was pretty good, but his interpretation was not, and he wasn't too good at saving notes or artifacts. Interestingly, the gentleman, his name was John Copper, did go on to work in Europe and was trained as an archaeologist and became a professor on Long Island. But his experimental stage has caused some problems for some of the work he did later.
Notably, that training happened after he dug in the Whitfield.
Yes, very notably. And then in the 70s, during the bicentennial, a professor from Eastern, an anthropology professor named Lee Langley, and she partnered with Beverly Anderson, who was the museum assistant, and they got permission from the state to do a series of digs. It's not very clear. Sorry for my exasperation, or the sounds of exasperation. It's not very clear their methodology on how they determined where they would dig, but there must have been some clues that led them to go out northeast of the house, way out into a field area where we really don't do much. We park cars there, overflow parking. And their theory was that the Whitfield house, there must have been a structure that people lived in while they were building the house. And somehow they zoned in on this one area, and they worked there summer after summer. They did a few other test pits here and there, but that was primarily their work area. And they claim to have found a floor with a cooking hearth and post holes, and they published about it, and then they got shut down because they weren't finishing up their reports or processing things. And I don't need to, make it sound like they were doing things, purposefully. They just, they really weren't set up to handle what they were doing and what they found. Mm-hmm. And you'll find out in a couple of minutes here when I get to our most recent work before Bill. That area became very, very interesting to our professional architects, archaeologists who came in. And they began in the mid-90s. Harold Julie and Connecticut College were working south of the house, trying to help us determine if a 1950s garden was on top of an actual garden area, and looking for the remains of a very large building that appears in photos next to the Whitfield house. Neither of those was proven out. No, the building was there, but it had no footings. And we proved there was no garden or kitchen area on that side of the house. Then we had some shovel testing done next to every downspout. Now, most houses back then didn't have downspouts, but after restorations and a basement, every time it rained, the Whitfield house basement would fill up with water. So we had some CRM done with Greg and Dorothy Walworth, and again found native stuff. Again, not in the right order. And then in 2000, we started a series in collaboration with Yale University, and we became their fall field school where they would come in every Saturday. And this was great because it was the first time that we really had a way to use archaeology as a public program and interpret it at the same time. In the 70s, people were working away from the museum and not really with the public. And so Yale had a couple different professors and master's degree students. They were great, but as Bill could probably better explain or at least use the terms properly, our professors, Tom Tartaron and Marcello Canuto, were more classical archaeologists. Tom worked in Greece, and Marcello, and he still does. I'm still in touch with him and Marcello. And Marcello works in Central America. And so their teaching method was great, a little bit different than what we do in New England, but the students were certainly learning how to be archaeologists in terms of methodology, but they were not very good, not their fault, in interpreting the material culture, the soils, the horizons, because it just was not, Tom would always joke with me, it's all Greek to me, which, that's a bad joke, but literally.
That's a terrible joke. It's terrible.
Man, you got to work on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can tell by the banter between Bill and I, and I'm sure it's happened with Sarah and Scott and other guests, that there's something about working together closely on an archaeological dig. It's almost being quarantined for COVID. You get slap happy after a while. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean you're not doing your job properly. But I enjoyed Yale because I got to be kind of the expert on the material culture, because that's what I deal with every day. And I got to learn quite a bit, about all the travels of all these other students and professors. So in any event, that brings us to Bill, and I've been going on and on and on. I would just let Bill take it from here, and I'll chip in.
Yeah. Can I just Can I ask one more question before you jump in? Sorry, this is an archaeology question, but I noticed from some of the information that Mike sent me about the previous excavations at the site and stuff, that they had kind of dug all around the foundation, basically all around the house. Mm-hmm. Are there records of the soils from that area? Like, are they encountering the ejecta in that area from when they dug out the basement? Is that where the Native American artifacts are coming from? Or, because I'm just thinking of, when you dig out that much soil, you got to put it somewhere. And usually that long ago, it doesn't go far away. And I was thinking of the Spencer Pierce Little House in Massachusetts, which is another big stone house from the 17th century that I worked at about 10 years ago. And really the ground around the house had been built up over time so much through various landscaping episodes and things like that the cellar windows are actually partially buried. And I just wondered if any of that dirt ended up right there around the house.
It's very possible. Definitely that amount of cubic yards of soil with wheelbarrows they're not going to go very far. That's where this analysis, is going to be, the numbers crunching is going to be really helpful. Unfortunately, with the changing in professors and such, and Tom and Marcello both went off to other universities, the reports and the artifacts did not come back from Yale until just, I want to say, 3 years ago. So we've only really just gotten the reports and the materials. And so we're hoping to do a little bit more study. And we do know just kind of one of the findings when we were digging right against the house. In the 1868, 1870 period, when one of the homeowners was remodeling the house because she was widowed and was going to move in, she had the entire house cement stuccoed, the whole outside of it. And yeah, it really is a very dramatic, different look. It's very Victorian. The windows are made much larger in the house. Large single-pane glass. Very typically Victorian stuff is done inside and outside. And that's when the basement was done for a central heating system, a furnace. And when all that soil was then removed. When Yale was working in the early 2000s with us, they uncovered a strip of that stucco. And so what we literally had was a marker on the building underground showing the 1868 ground level because that's where the stucco started. And then the 1930-31 removal level where J. Frederick Kelly and his WPA workers had removed it. And then subsequent soil above that from landscaping, composting. So we do have all these great clues. It's, like everybody's job, you wish you could, focus on, one thing for like even just a couple days or a week. And that has not happened anywhere, certainly not the last 30 years at the Whitfield house. So maybe if I retire, I could become an honorary archaeologist. I don't know.
Join FOSA.
I could do that. I could.
Yeah, you should join FOSA. Yeah.
Scott Brady chimes in, everybody.
Well, So, so we've gone, we've had these professional photographers, archaeologists, all of them university professors, and as Bill said earlier, we had gotten our stuff back from Yale and hadn't had any digging done since 2007, and the time seemed right, and one of the great advantages of this collaboration is Bill's background and his training, and as he said, he's a New England guy, and this is his specialty, and also the up and coming technology, and then the fact that we can look back at this half century in what appears to be a puzzle with pieces missing, and Bill's been really great, in our planning. All right, well, let's connect up 2000 Yale with 2002 Yale. And so then we have 2018 Southern touching or abutting. And we're going to be able to fill in stuff and then run those numbers and look at the, things as simple as Bill was mentioning the density count. And maybe, Bill, you could explain, we were suspect of Bill at first because we didn't know Bill. And so
I'm a shady character. Yeah, I'm a shady.
So we put him off in this area the first summer, and that's partly because he only had a few students, too. We didn't want to, you have to factor in, it's like the TV shows on all these professions. What you see on TV is not the job. The paperwork, the analysis, the microscopes, So we put him over in this area, which is actually proven to be very beneficial and does actually tie into some of the 1970s work. And we're going to get, neat little, thesis out of that, I'm sure. But in any event, he can tell you about things like artifact yields, and so take it away, Bill.
Well, I mean, Mike's being a little, he's being modest because actually he and the rest of the curatorial staff has been a huge help with our digs there. One point being, Mike mentioned at some point, just being an opportunity to do a sort of public archaeology, which is very true. We spend a lot of our time just talking to people who come up and who are just visiting museum or who are residents who live nearby, and they just come up and chat with us, and the curators have so much knowledge to be able to share with them, and Mike's been kind of our go-to guy there, and also just that expertise. No, as you can probably tell from the last half hour, nobody knows the history of this place like Mike does, and so to be able to just turn to him and say, "Hey, we found this thing. What was happening at the house in 1875?" And Mike could just get ramble you off a 10-page thesis about it. Is pretty dang handy. So he's been a huge help in that way. But I don't know. We were talking about the history of archaeology at the site, and I agree. It's really a complicated story, and a huge part of the job is going to be trying to put all those puzzle pieces together in future years. This work in the 1970s, I think, Sarah, as you know really well, that kind of site would be a sort of post and ground construction, small, early 17th century, primitive European style house. Those sites are exceptionally hard to find. They're exceptionally hard to dig. They're exceptionally hard to interpret. There's been some great examples in Connecticut and Massachusetts of these kinds of sites being explored by really, really good CRM archaeologists. In recent years, we've learned a lot more about those kinds of sites. So if that thing is really out there in the Northern Yard, that would be an amazing opportunity. But looking at the reports that came out of the 70s, we all have a healthy level of skepticism brought to that, so we'll see how that comes along. But those are my comments on that.
Well, I should say, Bill, I never finished that story. We had Yale go back into that area, and since almost 30 years had passed by the time Yale got there, and the 1970s work had been done, and the information and the kind of the lack of reporting and artifact yield was constantly being looked at by Nick Bellantoni, Dave Poirier, and then we had our Yale archaeologist, Greg Walworth. We basically, as time kind of evolved, we finally decided one of the Yale seasons, let's put a unit out there. Let's see what we can figure out. And that area became known as the grassy knoll because it was such a suspicious, kind of almost mythical story that had evolved. And as I said, the drawings and the minimal reports and artifact sets just kind of led us to think, yeah, is it really this? And so we finally put a unit in there with Yale and got down to the same level. And I remember one day, it seemed to me like everybody and anybody who was an archaeologist, who could get to Guilford that day were there, and we're standing around the outside of the unit looking down, and everyone was kind of shaking their head. And they all said, nope, that's not what they say it is. So,
yeah.
Not that we shouldn't go back out in that area, but this is where some of those things like LiDAR and stuff you guys can talk about, that I know nothing about, would be helpful, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, Sarah, do you want me to just dive into talking about the 2018 and 2019 seasons, or did you have any other specific questions you wanted to
No, and talk about what's going on with the archaeology, because we've been talking for 45 minutes already, so...
I know.
We're not even talk about. I mean, it's great. It's just been flowing, but I really want to get a chance to talk about your project a little bit and what you've been finding and how you've been pulling all this together. And you're working on a site where you could actually do the archaeology of the museum itself. So that's kind of in fact,
I'm really glad you say that, sir, because I think that's one of the most interesting things. So we've done 2 seasons out at the Whitfield House. Our first season was in 2018, and Mike was joking before about how they they stuck us out in like archaeology purgatory, which was true. They were testing. They didn't know. They had to make sure I was legit. I knew what I was doing, and that was true. We sort of picked a little spot that was a bit north of the house, where we just had no idea. It was sort of an exciting opportunity because we knew nothing about what we were going to find. And interestingly, we'll end up working sort of backwards through time here as I move from the 2018 excavations to the 2019 excavations. But the 2018 excavations revealed a really interesting little bit of archaeology about a period of the house that Mike mentioned as being really important, but that you might not think of archaeology as being a great way to talk about it, and that's actually the 1930s. So what we found in this little area north of the house was, we found a buried stone wall that we knew was going to be there, that had been deconstructed sometime in the early 20th century, had been built and then deconstructed sometime around the early 20th century, and so we knew that was going to be there. But what we found behind that wall, facing towards the road, was this giant pile of debris, big spread out pile of debris that was full of some of the stuff Mike mentioned before. It was full of that concrete stucco and roofing slate and window glass. And what we essentially had found was the dumping ground from what I think is the 1930s Kelly renovation of the house. So not old, but interesting. Letting my dog out here. He's being a crazy. And that's kind of given us an opportunity to just think about contextualizing that. So recently, trying to write this up as a little paper for the Connecticut Bulletin, I've just been diving into the literature about the history of historical preservation and colonial revivalism as a concept. And it turns out it's got this really fascinating, deep, rich history that I imagine Mike knows a bit about already. And trying to wrap my head around why did this place, the Whitfield house, other than it being old, okay, so it's the oldest house in the state, it's obviously an important historical place, but for hundreds of years it had just been a house, right? It had just been a house where people lived and it was rented, and certainly people were interested in it. But why did this place become the epicenter of Connecticut history at the turn of the 20th century? Why in the late 1890s are the colonial dames and the daughters of the American Revolution essentially fighting, according to Kelly, fighting with each other for the honor of convincing the governor to turn this place into a state museum? And it turns out that that's a couple of decades deep into the emergence of historical preservation as a concept. It's something that people did, and it's an idea that gets kicking in. Not surprisingly, places like Boston and New York City and Virginia, near Jamestown, and George Washington, Thomas Jefferson's plantations, places like this are the first places targeted as wanting to be preserved with some motivation. And I'm really interested in what drives that motivation. Is it patriotism, right? Like, oh well, it's the centennial of the country, and we want to celebrate that. Certainly, that's part of it. There's also lots of historical evidence that in other places, not necessarily at the Whitfield House, but in other places, we see that the reason for these preservation movements are actually about modern anxieties at the end of the 19th century. People worried about or freaked out by immigration from Southern Europe and changing racial dynamics because of a lot of African Americans moving north from the South after the Civil War, and economic changes. And so there's this kind of clinging to the past. You have these really interesting motivations kicking around. And so I'm just kind of really having a lot of fun learning about this fascinating history as it revolves around this little bit of archaeology we did on the 1930s of the Henry Whitfield house in Guilford. So that's kind of cool. That's sort of what we focused on in those 2018 excavations and where we're going with that. Not the most exciting archaeology in the world in terms of number of artifacts, but a cool window into this understudied part of history that, as I think Mike said earlier, is known to be an important part of the history of the Whitfield house itself.
But also very timely, I think, when you think about how we're kind of thinking about history and how we think about history and teach about history and talk about history right now, to kind of get at some of these motivations and the history of the history is really kind of fascinating, I think.
Yes, the historiography. It's a great grad school word. So I like that word. But absolutely, yeah. And like Mike was saying too earlier, the museum is interested and is engaged in that project of doing their own historiography, of doing reinterpretations and making sure that people are seeing the history of this really important site for more than just, it was built in 1639, look how old it is, right? It's actually got a really fascinating history over the course of the several hundred years that it's been occupied. And then if we can start to get into, of course, the Native American history that predates that, which is really a project in its infancy, that would also be important part of the story, as Mike mentioned.
Hey, Doctor, is there anything too? You referred a couple times to the ladies pushing for this to get the honor of being the first state museum. Is there any connection to the suffragette movement? Is there any connection to the fact that Lady Fenwick was related in some distant way to the Whitfields? Is there anything in that space that is something to kind of think on?
I think so. I think that what it turns out is that this historical preservation movement has an important role in women's history and the first wave early feminist movements that certainly leads to the suffrage movement and the gaining of the right to vote. So absolutely there's something going on there. But what you find is that a lot of these early preservation movements in Boston, for instance, are driven by women. They're driven by the daughters of the American Revolution. And this is seen as like a place where women can do important work at a time when they weren't really allowed into those zones. But there's also been, in being interested in those questions, like those timely questions about, say, immigration issues, I've been exploring that particularly because I do think, like Sarah was saying, that there are some powerful resonances with today on that, obviously. Some historians of historical preservation have talked about how you don't see, when women are driving these programs, you don't see them talk about those things so much because they kind of weren't allowed to talk about those anxieties. But that when men start to get involved, like male politicians, suddenly you do see people really expressly talking about, well, we need to preserve. Great example is Paul Revere's house in Boston, one of the early preservation movements. People talking about they needed to preserve it in the North End to save it from the stench of garlic and onion and pasta that was spreading in from the Italians who lived nearby, right? So these really kind of overtly anti-immigrant sentiments tied to the preservation movement. So just I don't know for sure those links specifically, but I do think that this is a story about women expressing power in a time when they weren't necessarily allowed to in such overt ways.
Fascinating. Hey, we're getting close to the end of the allotted time. I do want to say this just in from Ken Jennings. Dr. Farley, you have 72 more appearances before you can use my name.
Wow. That's up to Sarah. If she wants to bring me back, if I'm the winner, then I'm happy to keep appearing.
I'm safe. I still have my morning gig. So.
Yeah. I think of all the people here, there's an irony. I've actually probably been on the radio here the least. So
Hey, Sarah, shall we go around? Can we go around the virtual roundtable and start with maybe Dr. Farley? Just some end of the year thoughts. The year that was, the things you're looking forward to. We've got 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I didn't talk about the 2019 excavations at all, so I'll say in one sentence, they were somewhat standard fare from what you'd expect looking at a site like this, closer to the house. So more exciting archaeology, less exciting findings in some ways. But I think, like many people, I'm glad to see this year go, excited for the new one, and just want everybody to stay safe and be healthy as we hopefully come into our last few months of this challenging time.
Michael McBride.
Just happy to be here again, and hopefully we should, I think maybe we could look at this as, the beginning of a better year. Although I will say that just about everybody, no matter what they do, and particularly those of us who work in history and archaeology, we've, benefited in some ways due to COVID because we've learned to do things in yet another way. In some cases different, but I think a lot of the great techniques that we've been using to share our stories and promote our vocations, they're not going to go away. They're just going to, I think, become more regular parts. We're looking forward to going back to the come on in and actually see the real thing, because you'll be safe now. But I think these type of techniques that we, the radio interviews, the YouTube videos, the outside scavenger hunts, the things that were kind of like, we'll throw that in as an extra, I think are now going to become part of the norm. So thanks for having me, and happy 2021.
Want to say that this program is powered by FOSA, which is the Friends of the Office of State Archaeology. Scott Brady, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm very thankful in a very tough year that, especially for Sarah and all the guests that have come on and spent time with us in the topics that Sarah's created. And we're really hopeful that things will be a little bit better next year, and we can get back to a little sense of normalcy and get back out in the field and do some more archaeology.
Sarah, the microphone is yours.
Yeah, I'm with Scott on that one. I know that the beginning of the year is probably not going to be that much different from what the last couple of months have brought, but I do think that, things are starting to look up a little bit with all the good vaccine news that's been coming out, and, here's to hoping that we can have at least part of 2021 be a little bit more normal.
Hey, guys, it's so special to have you as part of the ICRV radio. If anybody is fielding a trivia team, here are your top candidates for the draft right here on Archaeology of Connecticut. Guys, thanks so much, and safe and healthy and happy holidays to you all.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.